Hi, thanks for joining us for Special Report Online. I'm Brett Baer. If this is your first time aboard, welcome. It's a different forum. Continue the conversation with our panel. We want to hear from you, so please weigh in, ask questions, make comments. Don't worry if you can't see it right away. We're getting them in there as fast as we can. Our panel, Dan Balls, national political correspondent at Washington Post, Mercedes Schlapp, columnist for the Washington Times, and, of course, Charles Krauthammer. Dan, we wanted to ask you more about this Washington Post effort with SurveyMonkey. You know, we were just talking in between the shows about, concerns about online polls and whether they are really there yet, as opposed to the live phone call, cell phone, landline. Your thoughts?
Well, Brett, there are online polls and there are online polls.
Yeah.
There's some online polls in which there's no effort. It just says, give us your opinion on us and everybody's response goes into that database, and that's what you see. An effective online poll of the kind that the SurveyMonkey did, and we spent a lot of time sort of testing and looking and satisfying ourselves that it would fit into our comfort zone in terms of quality. What they do is you get the responses, but then you have to go back and weight the ultimate results, in this case to the census data on registered voters in each of the states.
All right, let me interrupt you. Let's look at this screen. What are we looking at? This is the Electoral College breakout.
This is the Electoral College in a two-way matchup between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and the way the shapes are the size of those states in terms of their electoral vote, so that California is obviously bigger. The blue are states, the blue or light blue are states that Hillary Clinton has a lead of at least 4 points. The red states are the states where Donald Trump has a lead of at least 4 points, and the purple states are those where the margin is fewer than 4 points between the two of them. What it adds up to is that Hillary Clinton has leads of 4 or more points in states including the District of Columbia, states adding up to 244 electoral votes. Donald Trump, 126, 168, kind of up for grabs.
And it takes 270 to get the election.
Right. I mean, if she adds Florida, which is one of the purple states there, if she were to add Florida to what she has at this point, she'd be over 270.
The caveat here is that obviously these things can shift, and the debates may matter. But what we're seeing in national polls we haven't really seen as much in the battleground states, the shift that we've seen in some of these national polls.
Well, we've seen it in states like Wisconsin. The Marquette Law School poll went from 15-point advantage for Hillary Clinton to 2 or 3 points in their most recent poll. We've seen a little bit of tightening in Michigan. We know that Ohio's close. We have Trump a little bit ahead in Ohio. Others have Hillary Clinton a little bit ahead. We have Trump a little bit ahead in Iowa. Other states have that more or less even, or with her with a little advantage. But Iowa is a state that's not a friendly state to Hillary Clinton, as she learned in 2008 and almost learned again in 2016. Yeah. So Trump is doing reasonably well in the Midwest. He's got to do better, but that's an area where he can do some damage to her if he can continue to gain some momentum and some strength.
Mercedes, listen, a lot of people have a problem with polls overall. They just don't like them until they say what they want them to say.
And especially the Trump people. Bro.
Yeah, when they say that Trump's leading, the Trump people have a great time at polls.
Right.
But this election does seem different as far as what potentially comes out of polls. And we were talking about the battleground states. What I think is interesting is where candidates are spending their time.
Sure.
The fact that Donald Trump is spending time in Virginia is kind of interesting to me, because he's in the polls down, at some points double digits, but others are closing a little bit more.
Right, but I think Trump is still viewing Virginia as a battleground state. I think that for Donald Trump, what makes sense is he's got to carry all the Romney states in 2012, but then he's got to win a Pennsylvania, for example, or a Virginia. It looks tough, but you've seen in other polls in Virginia where it's actually tightened up. So is this national tightening up of these polls reflective in the battleground states? Is that shift going to happen in those states? That's going to be a matter of time to see if it really does move into those battleground states. But I mean, he is doing what you are seeing is the fact that he has the momentum right now. The debate's going to determine a lot, I think, and for him, it's making that case to those college-educated white voters, to the suburban moms who are traditionally Republicans and are having a hard time just getting there.
He has to get over that threshold that people can say, okay,
I can see him as president.
Right. It's okay.
Right.
It's fine. Alan in Maryland says, how does this compare to September 1980? You know, Alan, I looked at this numerous times because I kept on getting tweets and messages and emails about how Reagan was down 20 points and then came back in the fall. Actually, no. He started leading into the fall. And while it was a comeback from where he was at the beginning of the race, he actually had momentum well before this time.
Carter started out from way back. I know because I was writing speeches for Walter Mondale, who was running for vice president. They were not memorable speeches, I have to tell you, although I don't take the full blame for the loss. But no, I think, and with Reagan, that was the issue. I mean, essentially what Carter was running on was, this man is a joke, he's an actor, he's inexperienced, he's said a lot of wacky things, trees cause more air pollution than anything else. And it came down to the debate, and there was only one debate. And Reagan came off as genial, affable, knowledgeable, and it was over at that point. Look, the country was in pretty bad shape, and that sort of determined the election from the beginning. The challenger had one task: show yourself to be somebody people could sleep comfortably with if you were in the Oval Office and the phone call came. And he did it. Now, I think for Trump it's quite similar. Although I think here it's far more personality-driven on both sides. The ideological divisions which were far more rigid in those days, I think have really loosened. And, of course, Trump is running, as we said just earlier in the other show, in some areas he's running from the left. He's running from the left in terms of foreign policy. He's running from the left in his appeal to the working class. You know, the Reagan Democrats, the formerly loyal New Deal, Great Society Democrats. And to that extent, it scrambles the deck. And her task is made harder. When we compare it to 2008 and to 2012, we forget that Obama got the highest sort of percentage turnout among minorities sort of ever, off the charts. And had the turnout among Latinos, among African Americans and others been the norm, he would have lost, particularly in 2012.
Yeah.
Can she duplicate that kind of enthusiasm among minorities? And that's always been a question, Trump or not.
I mean, that is part of the effort to demonize Trump and to drive those communities down. But that is a question. I mean, this election may not look like the 2012 electorate. It may be completely different as far as the makeup of it. And a lot of these polls are based on the 2012 turnout.
Well, to some extent, although in general we don't weight our poll to that turnout. For example, in terms of party identification, we let that kind of float because people say at any one time, I want to identify as a Democrat or a Republican or independent. People
really don't get that one. We say it all the time.
Right.
We don't rely on party ID, and they get so mad when the poll comes out and it says, 3 points, 4 points Democrat. There was CNN poll was up a couple points for Republicans, and that's not a factor in how people are polled.
I think what both Mercedes and Charles said is important. On the one hand, Hillary Clinton has to reassemble the Obama coalition, and we know the enthusiasm for her is nowhere close to what it was for Obama in 2008. Or probably in 2012 in the minority community. But there is an effort underway through Get Out the Vote operation to identify, to target, and to get every one of those votes out. That's her challenge. Trump's challenge is twofold. One is he's been underperforming among Republicans. She's over 90% among Democrats in almost every state we looked at. And he's over 90% with Republicans in only about a dozen states. He has to do better there. But the key is the white college-educated vote. He's counting on a huge turnout among the blue-collar white voters. But he's getting beat among white college-educated voters. Mitt Romney won that group 56 to 42 4 years ago. Donald Trump's actually losing that group now, and in large measure because he's losing badly among white college-educated women. So his challenge in being more scripted as he's done, in reading speeches off the teleprompter, and his challenge in the debate will be to send messages of reassurance to those voters who up to now are resistant to supporting him.
So is his outreach to the African American communities in Detroit and elsewhere more about shaving a couple of points off of Hillary Clinton, or about convincing moderate or independent white voters that he's not a racist and that he's okay and can be president of the United States?
Well, I think he would like to do both with that. I mean, I think in his own heart of hearts, he should have more appeal in the African American community. I think that's a huge obstacle for him. So I think it's the latter that is the more important.
I think that there's something that worked for George W. Bush, which was that message of compassionate conservatism. That was a big sell, I think, for women in particular, married women, suburban moms.
That's not the sell that Donald Trump's making on the trail.
Well, that's the whole point. So when he does a direct appeal to the African American community, there is a sense of safe communities, about reaching out to those that are impoverished. That sells. That message works. It's
with soccer moms,
with the soccer moms, with the suburban moms, with the married women, with because living in Virginia and dealing with a lot of these suburban moms, it really is about temperament and tone. You ask them, and they're like, he goes too far for me. So that ability it's very attractive when he starts selling this more compassionate message. Hence, you bring Kellyanne Conway, who is masterful at selling this women message. I wish they would bring out Ivanka. Ivanka was a big sell during the convention. I think she relates to millennials. She relates to married women, working moms. You don't see her on the campaign trail. That's a missed opportunity.
Oh, we haven't seen Melania since the convention.
No. I had a thought, but I let.
All right, yeah, that's good. That's good. Let me keep it going. Jeff and OC. Trump views Virginia as winnable if he can galvanize manufacturers in Newport News area as well as Southwest Virginia miners. Look, Clinton's up 5 in Virginia in RCP, but of course he's also facing a former Virginia governor and current Virginia senator on the ticket with Clinton.
I think you can slice this anyway, and that's geographic, electoral college, demographics. I think in the end, this is going to hinge on debates far more than any other presidential election. I think if Trump can show not the bully side, not the tough side that he did, and that won him the Republican nomination. I mean, he kicked around the other guys. Nobody really kicked back, and he was the last one standing. If he can have that moment where he shows himself to be not scary. In 1980, it was Reagan saying about Jimmy Carter, I think it was a statement about Social Security, you're going to take it away. He said, "Oh, shucks, there you go again." Yeah. I mean, I was listening on the radio. I didn't actually see it, and I thought, that's unremarkable. But it turned out that when he said that, it made him look genial, affable, and he kind of smiled, and he disarmed the opponent, as he did 4 years later when he made the joke about Mondale's age and said, "I'm not going to exploit the relative youth and inexperience of my opponent over the age issue," which had become a big issue. I think he needs that moment. I don't think it's that hard to achieve. And, look at how the polls have shifted. As you said, this huge shift from minus 15 or so in some states to minus 2 or 3 as a result of what's happened to Hillary. It can shift dramatically. And once it does nationally, 5 points or so, that will topple a whole line of states. So this is not at all a foregone conclusion.
That's a question that some people have all the time about national polls. And Dudette 101 says, how many percentage points does Trump need to lead in a national head-to-head matchup in order to have enough electoral college votes to win? And that's the question you get, and it really doesn't matter. But it does show you, Dan, a trend in where things are going. The national polls this late, after Labor Day, start to show you where things are moving, but it does matter state to state, adding up to 270.
It does. I mean, most presidential campaigns to date, do not take national polls. They take combined battleground state polls and individual state polls. So they never look at an overall national number, and they scoff at the kind of thing that we do in the media with these national polls.
When you talk to the Clinton people, do they feel confident, or do they feel, a little iffy?
Well, they know they have a fight on their hands. They know that she has weaknesses that she has to deal with, and they know that Trump is an unpredictable opponent. They think he's a very flawed opponent, and they think they can exploit those flaws, and I think that she thinks she can exploit them in the debates. We'll see about that. But I think that they recognize that this is not something that's been put away at this point by any stretch of the imagination. I think there are some Democrats who fear that they're a little too complacent, but I think in Brooklyn they would say we are not, and we're doing everything we can, and we spent all of August fundraising in order to have all the money we need to do everything we want to do, both on the air and on the ground.
So two things. One, the national poll, the CNN poll that shows Trump up 2, fires up his base, obviously, because he's in the game. But it also potentially fires up her base and says, holy crap, this guy could win. And Right? I mean, both ways.
Well, and Trump loves talking about the polls. So I'm sure in the next couple of rallies we're going to hear him say, I'm up in the polls, this is great. And it motivates his base. But it's not enough to just motivate his base. This is about convincing those undecided voters, which what we're seeing is more undecided voters now than we ever saw in 2012.
So how much does ground game matter this year?
Oh, it matters. It's most of I think it's incredibly important, especially when you consider that Hillary Clinton is spending 3 to 4 times more on television ads. She just went up on Univision and the Spanish language networks with very terrible ads on Donald Trump. So the ground game is critical. It's who
terrible
we're going to get.
As in like devastating.
Devastating towards Donald Trump. And trying to motivate the Latinos to come out and vote in critical states like Florida, Arizona, Colorado, Virginia. So I think that while Clinton is winning on the airwaves, it's really not being reflected in what we're seeing in the polling, which is she should be doing a lot better in terms of the numbers. So the ground game is going to be who's going to be the most organized. How can you get out those votes,
but
especially
arguably,
in the urban areas?
It's not even close. That Donald Trump's ground game is largely reliant on the RNC, which by all accounts
it's very different than what we're
not
used to in a presidential campaign. Normally, it's a campaign working hand in hand with the RNC in terms of having this ground game operation. This year, the way the RNC has managed it is a new approach. We'll see if they're going to be successful. They've added about 1,000 more staffers on the ground in these critical states. It's a new approach. We're going to have to see if that's going to work.
You know what's fascinating, Charles, is the campaign CEO, Steve Bannon, is a guy who used to run Breitbart, whose sole mission was to take out the Republican establishment. Now he's working with the Republican establishment and the RNC to create this ground game so Donald Trump can win. It's pretty...
it's sort of us teaming up with Stalin.
It could be an orgy of irony.
Well, you never know. I don't know. This could be, and it would be censored if it really was. I mean, we did team up with Stalin. Churchill had the famous line when Russia was invaded by Hitler. He said something like, if the devil were to say something, were to come out against Hitler, I would find a way to say something nice about the devil himself. So, look, I'm not surprised, but these are the strange bedfellows that you find in any campaign. I would start with Chris Christie, who was not exactly favorable to Trump in the primaries, and then discovered the virtues of Trump soon after. So this always happens, and then you always end up, the first week or two after either party consolidates around a candidate, you get all the stories and the questions. You said X, Y, and Z, that your opponent, is the devil incarnate. How do you square that with your enthusiastic support today? And everybody does. Everybody understands it's a game, and they go on. I'm not surprised. And look, I think what's happened is Trump won. He beat the establishment in the nomination race. The establishment, such as it is, so-called, I would say, has decided it has only one chance this time around. and that is to join with Trump.
And he won without a ground game. That's what was shocking during the primary.
But that was a primary.
Right.
With 16 other candidates. Joan 40 says, does the panel know the questions before you go on air at 6? Just because your panel is very articulate in their answers. No. They don't. They know the topics. That's all, Joan. They know the topics. That's it.
Brett scares us to death while we're on the panel.
It's a very organic discussion.
But Joan, I've worked for 2 weeks on the orgy of
Saved it for this very panel. Just a couple more things. Are we going to get to substance, Dan, in these debates? Do you think that we're going to get the difference between the candidates on the issues? Or do you think that this will, like a lot of things we've seen, devolve into a very personal, can I get under Donald Trump's skin? Can I get to Hillary?
There will be some of that in these debates, but the commission formats are designed to force the candidates to talk at some length about these issues. I mean, the first debate, I believe, will be on 6 issues. There'll be 6 15-minute blocks. That's a lot of time. That's not a minute-and-a-half answer or a minute answer and a 30-second rebuttal. It requires the candidates to be able to speak with some fluency and some knowledge. Now, Hillary Clinton, we know, is a policy wonk. I mean, she will be, she's going through her briefing books probably every night until 2 in the morning because she's that kind of a student. Donald Trump, we know, prepares in a totally different way. I mean, he likes to wing it. And I've interviewed him a couple of times. When you interview him, the answer is not a kind of a straight line. I mean, he goes in a lot of different directions, as you know from your experience with him. So he could have more difficulty with that format if he is forced to speak at great length. On the other hand, he's got instinctive intelligence that has served him well in this campaign, and he believes he did well in those earlier debates, and I think he will probably try to do exactly what he did in those, and that is in one way or another intimidate his opponent.
By the way, just to weigh in to congratulate Chris Wallace, one of the debate moderators leading the way for Fox News in these general election debates. He got some grief for saying that he was not going to be a fact checker during these debates. And the thing is that is not the job of the debate moderator. Much like Jim Lair, you're trying to get the candidates to engage with each other. You are not the arbiter, as we saw in one previous debate, of whether they're lying or telling the truth.
That's why we have Twitter and the pundits. They'll be the fact checkers.
No, but that's why we have the opponent.
That's right.
The fact checker is the opponent. If the opponent can't check the fact on the air, on their feet, then it's not going to get done. We all know what a travesty it can be if the moderator steps in. We saw it, the famous moment with Candy Crowley. She stepped in. She corrected Romney. You could see it sort of shook him visibly. He wasn't prepared for that. And the irony of all this is sort of an orgy of ironies. She was wrong. Her fact-checking was wrong.
Right.
Romney was actually right. But that helped to tilt the whole psychology of the debates, which gets back to your question about substance. I think there's going to be zero substance here in terms of whether people are going to decide on, what your minimum wage is. The only purpose of the issues in these debates is going to be to illuminate personality.
I know, but to that end,
it helps
to
illuminate readiness and
readiness and temperament and tone. Yeah. But to that end, it really helps, positioning helps.
It helps Hillary.
Yeah.
Right.
Because if you go on this election, it should be a change election. It should be, this time is a change election.
Right.
And saying how she's going to be different than President Obama on the economy is challenging for Hillary.
Yeah.
Right.
But look, that's been her challenge since the very beginning. I don't know that she has accommodated that in a way that is convincing. But every vice president who's run on the tails of a presidency, and that's Gore and, of course, George H.W. Bush, they've all had the same dilemma. Hubert Humphrey was defeated by the fact that he was tied to Lyndon Johnson, the war, and he didn't want to betray Johnson. He softened at the end, and if the election had gone on for a week more, he probably would have won. But it's a dilemma that everyone who is certain administration wants to succeed, whether Secretary of State, it's usually the vice president, has to face, and how you solve it often determines whether you win or not.
All right, last thing. Bruce in Blaine asked, does the Libertarians stand to split the vote, and for whom? Dan, we went over just briefly those third-party candidate stats from your 50-state polling. Where do you see the answer to that question?
Not quite clear to me. I think up to now they seem to be taking a little bit from both, and I think that to some extent that's a reflection not of ideology, but of kind of they provide a safe haven for people who are conflicted, who are kind of holding their noses. I think if Gary Johnson and Bill Weld could get more visibility, they could pull.
If they could get in the debates.
If they could get in the debates.
They stand at 10% now. You have to get to 15% to get on that stage. It doesn't look like they're going to get there, does it?
It doesn't look like it. But the final round of polling for that decision won't come until later in the month.
Which Donald Trump should be asking himself, well, maybe we should invite Gary Johnson into the debate, because then it's less time that he needs to talk while he's up there. So it might actually benefit him more than hurt him.
Right. Well, why
you're
isn't?
giving me that
well,
face.
no. Well, why
that?
isn't he pushing for that? Why isn't he taking a stand that the election should not be?
It should be a democracy.
Well, I mean, we have what? It's September what? It's 26th. This is the first debate. Why isn't he making that?
I think that would be an interesting case for Trump to make.
Well, Charles mentioned 1980 and the single debate between the two of them, but before that there was a debate between Ronald Reagan and John B. Anderson.
And it was Ronald Reagan who said,
Carter wouldn't participate in it.
And of course, we can all remember Ross Perot
in
1992. It took 19% of the vote back then.
I mean, what you remember of him is the huge sucking sound. And when you remember what that was about, that was NAFTA and Mexican jobs.
Yeah.
This is not a new issue.
No.
This is not something that Trump invented. He got 19% of the vote, and he was almost certifiable. I'm talking about Ross Perot. He was kind of cuckoo, and remember, he withdrew because of a plot against his daughter's wedding.
And that 19% gave Bill Clinton the presidency, who got 42% of the vote in that year.
But it shows you there are 19% who will vote for anybody. I don't know how many people I've offended, but it has.
Well, the Ross Perot family just called. And everybody can look for Charles's new book, Orgy of Ironies, out this fall.
In paperback.
In paperback only. Dan, thanks for coming on. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you very much.
Mercedes, as always, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for Special Report Online. Hope you had fun. We'll do it next Wednesday. Control room, a little goodbye.